This is ThriveCasters,
Thriving, not surviving.
tackling youth issues that matter to you.
Hi everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of ThriveCasters, where we will be discussing living with ACEs. Your hosts today are me, Waseelah, and with me I have Hannah. So, as our guests today, we also have Trevor Walsh, a program manager at the BVSC, and Sharnna Gilsenan. Did I get that right?
Yeah, Gilsenan.
A further education PGCE student focusing on pastoral care. So hi Trevor, hi Sharnna. Would you like to both introduce yourself a little bit more and tell us about what you do? Trevor, if you want to go first.
Yeah, just a quick correction to my job title. I'm a project coordinator, but let's not get onto semantics. But yeah, I do work for BVSC, the Birmingham Voluntary Service Council. So just quick run through. I started at Birmingham Voluntary Service Council probably nearly 18 months ago now, after coming from the trade union sector, and primarily my work was working with the Home Office and the Gangs and Violence Commission and the Police Crime Commission, working on the serious violence strategy. And that's how I know Kit Shawande. We're working in that similar environment. Unfortunately, due to COVID, the emphasis on gangs and violence has taken a different emphasis. So my work is more focused on working with the NHS on different projects now. But that's quickly me.
Great.
Oh, no, one more thing. As an offer to the community, the Crime Commission pumped a lot of money into ACEs training at BVSC that BVSC hosted, and I had the luxury of looking into the training and got myself trained as a trainer and started to understand the whole childhood trauma journey. So that is definitely me now.
That's really good. So we're going to need your expertise on this podcast, definitely.
Yeah, don't be holding your breath.
And Sharnna, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Sharnna, obviously, and I recently graduated from UOB and I did sociology, and then so this year I started undertaking my PGCE to work in FE, but also to work in alternative provisions, so pupil referral units, to kind of work in a more pastoral sense to kind of address some of the adversities that those sorts of children unfortunately experience. And then on the side, I've conducted a couple of research papers, and my focus tends to be about working class, low income adversities and how that affects educational outcomes and achievement and success. And alongside all that, I actually come from a background where I actually experience a lot. I have a high ACEs count, so I've experienced quite a few childhood adversities. So yeah, I'll talk to you about the education side, I suppose, and the experience side.
Very cool. So we've got two people with us who definitely know the topic, so that'll be really good. So the topic at hand, adverse childhood experiences, or as we've been saying it, ACEs, is a subject that we found really, really interesting here at ThriveCasters, and we've already covered it in a few other podcasts, and it comes up a lot in the work that we're doing. So adverse childhood experiences are distressing incidents experienced in childhood that can seriously impact the likelihood of stability as an adult. To find out more, please have a listen to the previous podcast before you carry on with this one. But in this episode in particular, we want to understand how ACEs affect people in their everyday life and what we can do to reduce their impact. So our first question is something that is very simple, and we don't really think about it in terms of trauma, is how do ACEs affect your sleep and your day-to-day well-being? Trevor, do you want to go first?
I pitch in. Obviously, any traumatic exposure and any symptoms of that, they're all relative. It depends on the person. That's one of the first things you learn about any trauma, and particularly ACEs. And obviously, as children, we are resilient in lots of ways, but we're also vulnerable, and we're vulnerable to continuous trauma. So sleep is an obvious one, and obviously there's lots of medical evidence to suggest that how much sleep we need and how little sleep we need, but it's really important to how we regenerate, and how we regenerate as children is very important to how we become resilient to the knocks and grazes and the psychological knocks and grazes. So yes, it's an obvious answer is it can affect a person's sleep quite dramatically. And I suppose I don't have the medical evidence, but I bet you can ask a lot of people if they have sleeping problems as adults now, and you might find a big correlation to their childhood trauma experiences.
Definitely.
Oh, and I may add that, sorry, just to interrupt, but I may add that when I used to work in education as a wannabe teacher, one of the things that I was had the luxury of listening in on is going to seminars where the local authority in Solihull had close links with the NHS, and back in the day we'd call this ACEs, brain trauma and reciprocity, something like that. So, you know, like anything that's about childhood trauma, it's been given different names across the years, but even back then, the NHS and schools saw and identified an obvious problem between childhood behaviour in schools and as young people and what they can do on a medical sense. So yeah, that's what I'd offer. It's not about sleep. It's not a sleep related question, but it's just a little bit extra that I've learned about.
Sharnna, what do you think about how ACEs affects your day to day and things like sleep?
I think in terms of sleep, there it definitely, of course, it affects your ability to sleep. I know for me, I've always been a little bit of an insomniac, and you know, as a child, you could have thought that perhaps this was because I lived in a household that, you know, you could hear violence, like, you know, domestic violence, or perhaps you've got, you know, people coming in and outside your house really late at night. But I've certainly noticed, even through to my adult life, that I can't stay asleep for very long. I wake up consistently throughout the night, and I don't think I realised as a child that certain types of trauma and stress can certainly inhibit your ability to sleep. And I think the unfortunate thing is that the repercussions that this then has on a child's ability to learn is, you know, it's irreparable. Like when I was in my, I don't know, infant school, junior school, I certainly felt that I was learning slower than other people, or you know, my little brother, for example, had night terrors, so he'd wake up in the middle of the night and he'd scream for no reason, and it'd be almost hallucinogenic, and he had no recollection of it the night before. And I just think that it's a shame. It really is, because how are you supposed to go into school the next day and continue trying to learn to the same capacity as, like, you know, your peers and your counterparts?
Yeah, it's definitely a really, really good point, because I feel like people don't, like, it's not as well talked about ACEs and sleep as it is mental health problems and sleep. Like, I know mental health problems obviously can come from ACEs, but it would be interesting to see more of that research about exactly how ACEs does affect sleep. So, like, with that in mind, how do you guys feel that traumatic experiences can affect your brain, like maybe on like a neuronal structure or just generally? Trevor, if you wanted to go first.
Yeah, well, thanks, Hannah. Yeah, well, you know, we're repeatedly taught now that the brain has neuroplasticity, so it can recover well, but we're talking about childhood trauma where we're not giving the brain a chance to properly recover from anything. But yeah, getting into your question about the effects of and what we can do here, I suppose it's a difficult one, isn't it? I bet, and someone that used to work in the music industry to a point whereby I was a bit of a roadie, pushing boxes a lot, but basically I was up when people were asleep. Now, was I attracted to that role because of my inherent lack of sleep and my ACEs, or was it slightly separate. It just is incidental. But what I will say is that if working in environments that are slightly catered for the insomniac doesn't help when you try to develop a 9 to 5 lifestyle. So that's an obvious impediment there. But going back to you were saying, Hannah, the evidence is out there. It's about how we promote that evidence in terms of lack of sleep. I mean, going back to in a slightly different way, the Trades Unions Council have done lots of experiments on people that do shift work, and that's relative to people not sleeping properly but sleeping in different patterns. And the evidence is overwhelming in terms of detriment to your health. And that detriment can tend to come with people when they retire rather than people whilst they're at work, because when you stop working and start to find a pattern, that's when all the nasty stuff starts to happen. So we're clear that the evidence is there to suggest it's quite volatile to a person's health, but that can go on into most of your life. So it needs to be clearer, more promoted as a high profile on the effects of that, and we need to kind of address that as best we can in the workplace and in the communities.
Shan, what do you think about traumatic experiences and the impact that it can have on your brain?
Well, I'm not a neurologist, so I couldn't really tell you the science behind it, really. But I'd say, in my experience, both in terms of myself and my family, and then children that I've taught many years later, there are two things that really stick in my mind. And the first thing is, I feel like having experienced certain kind of ACEs has often led to children feeling as though they have to mature earlier, and certainly engage in certain behaviours many years before, let's say that would before their adulthood, essentially. And then the other one is, I'd say, memory loss. Experiencing certain traumas. When a child experiences trauma through their ACEs, they, as a coping mechanism, their brain can shut off. And this happens typically under times of stress and trauma, which in a way it's good because it stops that child from having to deal with that trauma, there and then, like at present. However, there are links between this happening to certain children where they have blocked off a certain trauma and instead they've engaged in certain other activities to help them deal with it. And this can be anything from like self-harm, smoking, drinking, gang culture, and the list goes on and on and on. So as I say, in a way, the brain does help you shut off from those traumatic experiences, but it really does have its downfalls as well. I think it's really interesting. I was talking to my friend Laura about this, and we both grew up. It's Laura who works in your team, actually. And we both grew up in the same school from nursery. And we were talking about school, and I was saying to her, oh, do you remember this teacher? Do you remember this? Do you remember this happening and this? And she could not remember hardly anything. And I think the difference is I blocked off a lot of my home life. So I remember school because I don't know, let's say I was happier or it was a more pleasurable experience. Whereas for her home life was more, let's say pleasurable. So she was more likely to remember that, whereas I blocked it out. And I think, the difference in what you can recall then was it was really, really interesting to us. So yeah, I think it has a massive relationship.
Yeah. And can I just add to that, there's an obvious socioeconomic element to it as well.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the support mechanisms to help you and, people around you to help you with all those aspects of lack of sleep and the trauma and the effects of it, then it's an obvious game, isn't it? You've got support mechanisms. But generally, without getting too political, our country has gone through years of austerity. There are so many gaps we can't even begin to describe them. We're talking about a digital gap, and that's a big deal. But so yeah, the obvious big impact is that our society isn't evolving in terms of support mechanisms. It's getting worse, if anything. So we have to add that to the equation of the effect of ACEs, and how certain areas can be masked in terms of the symptoms of them, and but also a lack of awareness of organisations knowing how to deal with people, and even staff members that have ACEs. So yeah, we've got a long way to go in terms of the remedies, but at least we're getting closer to understanding the narratives, as Sharnna said, and others will probably contribute to their experiences.
Yeah.
Can you expand a little bit by what you mean, support networks and all of these things?
Well, one of the things that I've learned, there's a topic in the ACES training, and it's about resilience, and the resilience is explained. It's not just being able to get back from the knocks and grazes. It's about having routines and having someone to give you a routine, having a parent, having an in-law, having someone, a family extension, anyone that can keep you on the right track and that can keep you back to your program. You'll hear it from lots of people that have talked about drug addiction. One of the things that helps them is having a routine. So they don't have to worry about going back to the same old thing that brought them back into that dark area. So yeah, those are things. And those things that probably don't cost money, but they cost someone's time. And if someone's scenario A, you have a parent that's got 2 jobs and the other parent's got 3. And so child needs support on a certain area. The parent hasn't got the time. They're too busy trying to bring home the bacon, as it were. And so, yeah, it's things like that may not be attributed to affluence, but they're attributed to resource and time.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there. And I think that's why, for me, an investment in education is so key for, for people that have experienced certain traumas and adversities, because it gives them a chance, if they haven't got the support at home, for example, then it gives them a chance to confide in, someone else within their school or within education. Most schools have got counsellors now and things like that. And I think, that's one of the reasons I actually went into teaching, because I wanted to be able to be there if a child come to me and said, okay, this is going on, because and then I've got the training to point them in the right direction, and like when I was a kid, like I wasn't bothered about school. I had loads of absences and I didn't do the homework because I felt inadequate, and it took one teacher, that's it, to just be like, come on Sharnna, you actually, like, you can do this, and that little bit of faith from that one person is actually what led me to now engaging in research, doing my PGCE, and fighting for this kind of education inequality. Brilliant. So I think it really is a big investment.
It's the scary question for Public Health England. Any institution that is involved in what's happening on the front line with our services, with police, nurses, anyone that's going through PTSD, and that's one area of their life. But how did they get there? Did they have ACEs before that as well? And so you might have people that have gone through a litany of trauma from their childhood to even their frontline roles. And what are we doing about that? Are we waiting for something to happen miraculously? And it's no good saying that, government after government, whether they're red, blue or yellow, saying that it costs too much money. ACEs and childhood trauma is part of a looming public health crisis that we're seeing the signs of anyway, and we will see the signs of post-COVID even more. So yeah, I don't know, if it was me and I had the money tree, I'd definitely put some serious resources into stemming the blood flow of trauma from a childhood age seeping into an impact of that people's adult lives.
Yeah, I think you're completely right there. I think for some people, there might, and even me for a very long time, there was a kind of misconception that these kind of unfortunate experiences that you've gone through childhood would somehow disappear, and you wouldn't really feel the effects of it in adulthood. But that is obvious, of course, it's not true at all. And many people spend their lives, and I was one of them, trying to avoid what had happened and just carry on as normal and be like, it's fine now because now I'm doing this, now I'm at university, but then the more you put it off, the higher chance that person then has of exploding years and years later into adulthood. So if it get, we can put, as you say, investing in public health. If we can do that for both the children and adults, then hopefully, we can kind of try and mitigate or minimise the unfortunate effects that these things are still having when people enter their adult life.
Yeah, totally agree.
So it's really interesting what you're both saying, and how how schools were such a necessity in sort of getting over trauma and people supporting you in things. So from a previous podcast that Hannah and I did, we were talking about how we need to create a social movement amongst young people ourselves and develop our own awareness to help each other. Do you guys have any ideas as to what that might look like in your vision? If you could dream up what the social revolution looks like.
Well, you can go first on that one. I'll have a think about that. Yeah, let me have a think. A social revolution on that. I don't like to be too pessimistic. It's something that is an obvious one that we can raise awareness on, and I suppose you can look at it from loads of different aspects, can't you? We know that there are people out there speaking as advocates for, I don't know, say something like the rise in suicide rates, and particularly male suicide rates that isn't really talked about as much, you'd argue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a social revolution a social revolution would mean something like similar to what's happened with the Black Lives Matter agenda. People should be protesting about the billions that should be spent on public health globally, let alone nationally. And there should be an articulation about how that's value for money if you invest in that, and it's not an extra cost, it's an investment. So my vision of that, it should be driven by young people, and it should be a massive movement that is supported politically as well. I mean, I try to do so much work with my local Labour Party, and lots of issues come up about the ills that affect society. And one of the things that we talked about was I don't know, I suppose education and how young people identify with politics. But if young people can't even identify with their own psychologies, then they've got a really hard struggle ahead. So this social revolution, this social in my books, needs to be run by and funded by political agencies, government agencies, anybody that's attached to mental health, and it should be it should start now.
And I think that you are, in terms of my own vision as well, it would also be led by the young people, and I do completely get that, working in conjunction with mental health and counselling and doctors, etc. And not to sound not to put a bit of a downer on it, but my only issue there is that young people, as from seeing the young people that I've worked with, they do not like to admit or broadcast the type of things that they've been through, the adversities that they've experienced. I don't know what it is: embarrassment, shame. Maybe they don't even realise, the extent to how bad it is. I know I certainly didn't. And I think that is one thing that is in the way of that kind of social revolution. Even though, in a utopian world, it would be lovely to have, all the kids work together to, get past it. And I think, in today's current climate as well, when you're still seeing like news stories where, I don't know, 17% of disadvantaged kids went to university in 2018 or 19 last year. And that is so low. That's only 17% of entire population, and things like that. And then recently, what's happened in Scotland? Is it Scotland? They've standardized GCSE grades. They've given people predicted grades, but all the students that are in deprived areas, they've got lower grades than people who are living in, who are in private schools. And I think that, though, yes, it's a good idea to have, it'd be lovely to have this revolution, and it does need to be spoken about, and hence why I'm here today, and I'm sure Trevor feels the same. But when you fighting against an unequal system as it is, you know, in terms of politics and the economy. It's so difficult, and you know, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but it's just so difficult. And I think that's why it's good that, you know, you have NGOs and companies like yours are actually going around, and they are trying to like work from more of a local base, like going into schools, and you know, intervening about like knife crime and stuff. But I think that is really useful, and I think that is probably the most useful thing that you can do at the moment, because you've got so many hindrances on the outside world as it is. So I think going in within schools is probably for the best. So I went on a bit of a tangent about society.
That's
then
all right.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's easy to do so, Charlie. It's, you know, because we know that the effect of childhood trauma it has a magnitude so far beyond its incident, doesn't it? As we're discussing, it can affect your life from here on in, and because the brain needs to shut down those experiences, it can't function. So to cope, you'll forget about stuff, and then things will research. Like I was in a training session whereby someone discovered an ACE trigger was triggered by walking into Boots and smelling a particular aftershave. They became catatonic, but didn't know why, and then it worked out it's because of a child's experience. So yes, and that's the thing, isn't it? You know, there are so many issues that needed to be championed, and no more so than equality. And if we haven't even got an equal society yet, you know, and let's go back to the gender pay gap. Women still aren't on course to earn as much as men into the next 150 years. So, you know, ACEs and childhood trauma is down the list. However, let's look at what's been happening in the news lately with police violence amongst black boys particularly, right? Now, from my view, there's a massive correlation between ACEs, PTSD, and how people need to operate on the front line, and how they can and can't, and how they don't have the support mechanisms as adults. So, you know, if we're talking about emergency in mental health, if we're talking about emergency in ACEs and childhood trauma that needs to be addressed, you know, I think we're all equally agreed, but we don't want to be pessimistic, because we're having problems navigating some of the simple revolutions that need to happen, aren't we?
Definitely, yeah. And I think that's why taking a more localized approach will probably be more successful than
Totally agree.
fighting a massive cause.
Yeah.
What you both had to say about like your thoughts behind a social revolution are like also true. Like, let's pray for a social revolution. I guess that's what we're trying to, like, there's a little part of what we do in ThriveCasters and in other parts of the organisation, we want like social change there. But going back to ACEs, what do you guys think is the result often of a high count of ACEs? So like in research, I guess there's a lot of like offending with high count of ACEs, and then like high levels of antidepressant usage, all of that kind of things. What have you guys found in high level of ACEs? Sharn, if you wanted to start off.
What I've experienced and what I've seen, as I've already mentioned, you know, the educational inequalities completely. You know, the less likely to achieve the same grades as, you know, your counterparts, less likely to attend Russell Group universities, and you know, so the educational inequality. But I mean, that aside, I think other outcomes, you know, what I've witnessed with my family certainly is health inequalities. So a lot of my family members have, you know, been diagnosed with, let's say, chronic diseases, you know, diabetes and arthritis and COPD and emphysema, and the list goes on and on and on. And, you know, this is being diagnosed at very, very early ages, and then some even passing away very, very early as well. Like, I think my nan passed away at the age of 54, which is very, very early. And then I think, so I still live in the council estate that I grew up in, and one of the outcomes that I've noticed are the people that I grew up with there, they still live there, and because of their ACEs and not addressing them adequately. You know, I might have seen them engage in certain acts of, you know, crime, gangs, drugs. But yeah, and then I think the biggest one for me is probably, you know, that leading to, you know, mental health problems, and, you know, so I've got 4 siblings, and all 4 of us have, you know, like anxiety or depression, just as a result of experiencing what we had to, like, growing up.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Yeah, it's tough for me to tell you what I've experienced in terms of, you know, people with ACEs and the effects, but without going into the coursework, as Sean said, it's yeah, any kind of disease that you're more susceptible to. You know, you're susceptible to mental health issues, you know, physical diseases, and the list goes on, and addiction. And so, and the problem with that is we can lazily say that in response, well, so you're saying AIDS is responsible for everything, and even blaming my parents. But, you know, it does have a massive responsibility, as in terms of where you start from in your pathway to being a human being and growing up to where you end up in. I mean, there's a triangle that talks about where ACEs leads to, and the certain effects in terms of ill health, the chronic ill health, and then the pyramid, unfortunately, ends up in early death. And so, you know, that can't be articulated any stronger in terms of, if you're unsure about the impact of ACEs and what it can do to, and what it's been responsible for societies without us knowing and learning about it now. It's never been more clearer. I don't know how else we can make that clear, but I think as the years go on and people start to relate back to these conversations and organisations start to embed more ACEs into their organisations, I think we'll start to see more and more of understanding the impact more, because they'll have better conversations, but they'll also be able to deal with people that come into the organisations better, and hopefully it'll be the start of some kind of redress to helping people. But the biggest thing that comes a bit too late is that you might be able to survive from a particular physical illness as a result of ACEs. But how long does it take to recover from the mental health aspects? And how much does that cost? Can you afford that? You know, does a counsellor get you through that? You know, so yeah, that's where I am.
I completely agree there, and I think as well, you know, a lot of you know, mental health issues can also be linked highly with then having physical health problems as well. And so I think that yeah, so for example, if you were going to go on antidepressants, for example, you know, that could lead to then, you know, kidney deficiencies, you know, certain issues with your digestive system. So I think it's really, really interesting. You're saying that you know, even though you could recover from a physical illness, how long will it take you from with a mental health issue? And I think that, you know, they're so closely linked as well. It's so detrimental. And I think I certainly didn't realise how these kind of experiences that people have been through can have such an impact on, you know, on your health, on like early deaths. And until I started reading around ACEs, I had no idea at all. For example, I just thought that my family had 4 genes, and I didn't realise it was a reproducing a cycle of what they'd experienced. I think it's really, really interesting. I think it's something as well that kids should be aware of. Certainly, just so they can, you know, put things in place to, you know, maybe counselling, or to kind of talk about it, to reduce that stress, to minimise the potential that they will end up with certain kinds of illnesses.
Yeah, I agree again on that, Sean. And one of the things that I kind of missed out is that we have to be careful, because some of the backlash of, you know, dare I say it, some naysayers that don't like us talking about ACEs because it's dangerous, because it's trauma, and what happens when you poke the bear cage, it's a can of worms, is that, you know, ACEs awareness is not about treating or teaching everybody to be a counsellor or a psychotherapist. You don't have to be. It's just making sure that you are aware of yours, others around you. It could be at college, it could be the workplace, it could be anything. It's just the awareness, and with the awareness itself, it's half the battle. So we do have to be mindful that someone's reaction is, oh, you're talking about ACEs, you're talking about trauma and PTSD and all these medical things, but you're not trained. You're not a medical therapist. No, that's not the point. The point is, if we can't talk about ACEs, we've got no way on earth of dealing with it where it starts, and it starts in a conversation. It could start with an argument. It could start with a bit of discord between the employer and the employee, and the employers that know how to deal with this person's symptoms that come from their childhood trauma. So yeah, it's to reinforce that we're not asking people to be practitioners and medically trained psychologists. And if we go down that road, we'll never get to the profile raising of mental health and ACEs that we need to. But it's more important to say, listen, just someone that can hear and listen to you, understand what the triggers are. And also it's this thing about that the chances are, and the studies are saying, that we've all got ACEs, we've all had experiences, some childhood trauma to some extent. But it's the extent that it impedes your development is the important bit.
I think what you were saying about people need to be trained just to make themselves aware of those around them and their own experiences and stuff. I think you're completely right there. I think one of the greatest things I learned during my teacher training, for example, was we were learning about adverse experiences and all that. As a practitioner, all that made me reflect on was for example, if a student's late, identify that there might be other reasons while they're late that are related to certain kind of adversities. So it's just about sitting them down, talking to them, try and make it not happen again. See what you can do, and then simple things like I've had students who are jumpy if you tap them on the shoulder or if you talk to them abruptly and stuff. So all that as a practitioner made me do was just be more cautious, when approaching them. Perhaps say their name before you go up to them. Don't abruptly tap them on the shoulder, for example. So I think, and it's the same with any field, providing you're aware of them, and even minor things like that, like the being late and being jumpy, then you can make a person's life so much easier. So I think you're completely right there. I think having the awareness is so important, and I didn't realise that, to be fair, I didn't realise some people didn't want ACEs to be spoken about. That's new news to me as well. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah, no, yeah, totally agree with this. Well, yeah, but no, yeah, Sean, it's unfortunate, like with anything, people, we are risk averse in lots of ways, but also I think it's the uncomfortable conversations, isn't it? I think, but also some people are coming from the right aspect, that it's scary stuff talking about trauma. So we did need to be mindful. But yeah, we've had lots of conversations. I mean, I ran a community of practice on behalf of my organisation, but also on behalf of the Crime Commission, whereby as trainers, we all kept in contact. We had seminars together and started talking about the things we need to do before COVID hit, which unfortunately stopped the things we wanted to do. But, all these elements started to come out in terms of how people get the wrong end of the stick, but also there are caveats and areas that we have to be mindful of, because, it is important that if somebody takes away this training and starts to exercise techniques on a child, that they're getting it right and it's not detrimental. And so, concerns are rightfully there, but it's about explaining what childhood trauma is, explaining what adverse childhood experiences are, explaining where they come from, explaining what the end game is, but also explaining if we don't do anything about it, we won't have a society worth living and working in.
I think something that Hannah and I have both found, and I think you guys have highlighted it as well, is that when you start to read about it, then you come to understand just how common adverse childhood experiences are. So we did a few quizzes and things, and we passed them around on the team, and then everybody sort of sat there and just went, oh, actually, maybe I have gone through something, like how much of who I am is actually informed by this stuff, and how much has it affected me. And like to put something like that into teaching is obviously really, really important, and because it gives the space that people can recover from it, even if they don't know that they've been through something. So in terms of raising that awareness, so Hannah and I have done a lot of reading around it, and you both have obviously done your reading as well. So what are the resources that you think as young people we should access first to get an awareness of it, as it's not super mainstream in schools right now, it's not mainstream on social media either. So where should be the first places we should go to inform ourselves about something like adverse childhood experiences, when a lot of the time we just dismiss it and just say, this is normal, everybody goes through this stuff, it doesn't matter. Like things like divorce, I think, is a really good one. Like divorce and breakdown of relationships in the home, they're so common, but then you realize that it's a trauma, and it's like, oh, okay, maybe there's something else going on here. So where do you think we should go first?
For me, it's definitely the schools that you need to go to, and I only say that on the basis that I feel like there are, I don't know, the adversities that I'm aware of in other people, it's that it usually stems from the home. So I feel like the next place that a child spends most of their time is the school, and it's their next point. It's the next place where they've got like another adult that they can potentially rely on or talk to or go to. So I think, as I was talking about earlier, you start intervening in schools and making people aware within schools, then it might, make some children go, oh, okay, that helps. For example, when I was doing some research a couple of years back, I was talking to a young person who had experienced some degree of abuse growing up, and one of the things she said to me was, well, when I was in school, everyone just thought I was quiet. I didn't realise, because it was never obvious to me that what happened to me growing up was actually wrong. She was like, so when we're in assemblies and they're just, they're talking to us about the history of the school or spellings, she said that if they use that time to just talk about certain circumstances and certain experiences that can happen in the world, as you mentioned, like, divorce and, family members being in prison, then it might make that, a couple of children go, oh, the same way it did with you guys when you did the quiz, oh, that actually is wrong. And then when they've made that connection, then it can start to be addressed, if that makes sense. So I think that schools are definitely a big place to start. I'm sure there are many others as well, but for me, I think that.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I number one, I like yourself, I said that I welcome the fact that it's on PGSC teacher training courses now. Certainly wasn't in my dark days in the 1930s. No, I'm not that old. So, but yeah, that's a great starting point. If schools were a resource to start having conversations, whether it's in their school teams or whether it's parents, or it could be part of, I don't know, a parent day, that would be great, wouldn't it? But going back to where I got it from, my advice would be for someone that doesn't know anything about ACEs, have a look at Felitti, have a look at where the study came from in terms of Kaiser Permanente, and get some insight into the origins of where ACEs came from. It's literally an accidental study correlating obesity to sexual abuse. That's where ACEs came from. So I'd say, do a bit of research on that. But what is the stuff out there? Just look at there's two. I think there's the NHS Scotland video that I think most of us have seen. But if you've not, that's a good place to start, because it talks about the effects in society. There's that. I think the Scottish one is, the Welsh one. There was a scene. There was a young guy in a bus stop talking about the effects of ACEs on him in terms of his mental health, his behaviour. So my thing would be for anyone is to do a bit of research on where it comes from. If you would like to read about Felitti and the Kaiser Permanente study, great. But look at some of the simple things out there, like NHS websites about ACEs and trauma. Those videos are really good. It encapsulates what you got to know, where you've got to go to, and where you sit in that understanding and where you should be going. But when in a perfect world, information that a parent could access about ACEs would be great if it came from schools, wouldn't it? It'd be great if it came from any kind of community area that we'd want to visit. It'd be great if it came out of churches if people are religious. It'd be great if it came out of any societal output, any area. It should be commonplace to talk about trauma because we keep reiterating the effects, if we don't deal with them, are catastrophic potentially. That's me shutting up. Sorry.
I think you're actually right in educating the parents as well, because I bet a lot of parents out there who have had children or been through any kind of adverse experience themselves probably are not aware of the repercussions and what can happen as a result of going through that. So I think definitely allowing parents and children to offer support, whether that's through videos or blogs or schools. I think it'd definitely be an eye opener for a lot of parents and a lot of children, definitely.
Yeah, because a scary backdrop in some of the ACEs training is it does start talking about, without getting too technical, and I think I've forgotten some of the technical names actually, about how trauma can be inherited, but it also says don't blame your parents. So yeah, that's a relative one, isn't it? What you don't want to do is looking at the studies and going back to your mum and dad and saying it's your fault. But at the same time, you want that dialogue, don't you? So yeah, that the parental involvement is key. Yeah. How we get to that is another discussion. As you said, I think, as Sean said, I think when we're talking about all the answers to this, it's a local response first, isn't it? And local responses can spark a national momentum, and then all of a sudden you could get a global response, as we've been seeing global responses since COVID. I think people have got more ears to listen now. So yeah, that's just to add on what Sean said, the parental engagements to talk about childhood trauma with the parents and the child together. That'd be a great thing for it to be happening commonplace.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And I think it helps with lockdown as well, where some schools are delivering free school. Some teachers are delivering free school meals to students. Teachers, I know my partner who teaches secondary English. He rings his form group every week, and he speaks to the parents. He then speaks to the kids, and I think that kind of reinforces to the parent as well. We are here to help, so there is that communication there. The kids know that they've got the support still. The parents know they've got the support still. So that's just a minor example. So coming from that, much more can be done on this, on a similar note. So
yeah, and going back again to that question, and I said it takes money, it takes social responsibility from the powers that be. So then that asks you, then what can government and our authorities do about promoting the understanding of ACEs? And so, Public Health England are doing their bit, because that's, the online videos out there. It's an introduction to ACEs and understanding that, which I won't advertise, but people can look at. So, but they're doing their little bit. But as we said, the effort is colossal, and the effort is not going to get any more diminished since COVID. It's going to get even greater. So how quickly this local response can happen, it needs to happen yesterday.
definitely.
I think they were really, really good summaries about where to go, because I've learned stuff there I wouldn't have really known, especially more so about the schools. I don't really remember how my school used to deal with it. But yeah, definitely. So from today, for our listeners, what would you say the one takeaway thing would be on ACEs? Trevor, if you want to go first.
One of the things that we learned is that, like HIV in the 80s, and people were treated like lepers, even put on separate wards. So therefore, you knew somebody that had HIV and had AIDS just by going into a hospital. One of the great things that gave was it forced the medical profession to treat everybody with potential disease. So you go to your dentist now, they wear a mask and gloves, okay? And that's because of the level playing field that AIDS brought to the forefront. I think the great message about ACEs is that everyone's been a child, so everyone may have experienced childhood trauma. So we're all in this together, regardless of any other sound bites when you rhetoric. This is not a governmental slogan here. We are all in this together. The chances of us having experiences one or more is quite obvious. So yeah, that's the one thing, you know, ACEs may have affected all of us. So let's all be part of the fight.
I completely agree with you there, Trevor. It has to be everybody fighting for the same cause, addressing it. And I think, you know, for me, probably the takeaway would be invest in your education. And I don't mean in terms of, you know, work hard and get grades. I don't mean that. All I mean, you know, understand that there are people you can talk to in schools. Teachers also need to understand that there are small things that they can do to, you know, help in that kind of respect. And as you were saying, everybody needs to. It's going to be everybody needing to work together to kind of address ACEs. And I think, you know, within a school community, especially, if everybody was on board, you know, parents, teachers, counsellors, you know, cooking staff, everybody. I think, yeah, education is the massive investment. I think it can go a long way. It can help a lot.
Absolutely, totally agree.
Those are both really, really good points. We've had so many good points across this whole podcast. I've actually learned a lot. And so Hannah and I spent so long reading about it, but there's clearly still so much more to know. So thank you so much both for joining us today. And yeah,
thank you for having us.
We're really, really
thank
profound. It's been great. Really profound conversations happening. If people want to know more, where can they find you to contact you, if that's possible?
If we want to know more from me and Sean,
if they want to follow up on some of the things that you guys have said.
From an email address, something like that?
Emails, social media, anything.
Yeah, you can have my work email address, which is trevorw@bvsc.org. If you want to, you know, ask any other questions, and I'll try and find some space and capacity to respond. Honestly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Sean, I think we've got your social handle on your little squares that people can follow you
So
there.
the best way to contact me would be through Twitter at SocioSharn. Obviously sociology, don't laugh at my handle, thank you. So right. Yeah, and I tend to read up a lot about, you know, class, disadvantage, drug policy, and typically ACEs and disadvantage. So nice. Contact me on that.
That's great. So yeah, don't forget to follow us too on Point WM. Comment and like and let us know what you think and what we should be talking about next. So thank you for joining us, and be back next time with more conversations that matter to you. Don't forget to follow us on social media on Point WM and #ThriveCasters. Join us next time for more conversations that matter to you.